Welcome to our weekly Church on the Rock podcast. For more information, visit us at churchak.org, download our Church on the Rock AK app, or like us on our Facebook page. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy our weekly podcast.
We have been journeying through the book of Revelation, which many people view as a future-oriented book, and certainly it is, and we're going to get to some of that today. But we've kind of chosen to describe this book as a journey that we're on. And when it comes to journey, there are really two kinds of journeyers. There's the kind of journeyers that believe, in the end destination, and everything along the way to that destination is a little bit superfluous, right? It's all about reaching the mountaintop. And then there's the other kind of journeyer, traveler, and you know them because they have a camera in hand. And every tree and every flower and every bush and every cloud, white puffy cloud that they encounter, they pause and they stop and they kind of take a picture of it. And whether or not they ever reach the end goal of getting to the mountaintop, it doesn't really matter. What matters is the journey itself. And as you go through the book of Revelation, it's that second kind of journeyer that John is, as he receives this revelation, as he receives this vision from heaven. Every scene is meaningful. It's less like an airport terminal where your goal is to get there and get on the plane. It's a whole lot more like touring a zoo, where you made it to the zoo, but really it's all about each exhibit. And every time you stumble onto a new exhibit, something new happens, and you're supposed to capture a picture of it, capture an image. And John is taking us on that kind of a journey, and he uses doors to capture the images. In fact, if you were to put this into a phrase, what John is doing is he is giving us doors as indicators to destinations. Every door is, in and of itself, a destination, an exhibit that we're supposed to get in on that informs us about something in heaven, something about our future, but something here on earth that can transform the way we work, live, move, and breathe. And there are several doors that are mentioned. In fact, if you just kind of go with me there in your memories, the last couple weeks, you'll remember the door of opportunity. There was a number of churches that receive revelation, and one of those churches receives this revelation in Revelation chapter 2, and it was the revelation that there had been a door opened for them for the gospel, a door to preach, a door of opportunity, and it was a door that no man could shut. Can you imagine getting in on that kind of a revelation? Hey, I just want you to know, Church on the Rock, there is a door open for you. You're going to talk to significant people, and even though there'll be tribulation, there'll be suffering, there'll be things to endure, there's trial. In this world, you will have trial. Here's what I want you to know. I've opened a door from heaven. I've opened a door, and nobody can shut it. The message will be released. I just want you to know that. It would have been incredibly encouraging, and this was a door of opportunity. The other door, more familiar, that we get in on is really where we get the theme for this series from, and it's also part of one of the letters written to the 7 churches, and it's the door of fellowship. And it goes something like this, right? Behold, I stand at a door, and I knock. And the idea is that I'm on the outside of the door, I'm knocking on the door, you're on the inside in your home where you live, work, and play, right? In your life, that's where you are. It says, I'm on the outside and I'm knocking, and if you open the door, what is the promise? The promise is that I would eat with you, which in the Middle East was a sign of intense fellowship and friendship. In fact, this image is from the Old Testament idea that is articulated by David himself. King David writes about this door of fellowship in Psalm 23. At the end of his life, he recounts all of the things that God had done for him throughout his life, and he takes us on a journey through the shepherd years and then into the palace years. And it's there that he has all kinds of enemies emerge, but there, in those days, towards the end of his days, he says, there you eat with me. and my cup overflows. You were not ashamed to be with me in the presence of my enemies. And here, that same imagery is called upon to encourage the believers. Hey, listen, I want you to know that God Almighty is knocking on the door, and He wants in. He wants to sit with you, to fellowship with you. He wants to lean into whatever circumstance it is that you face, whatever trial that you face that you're not in control of. The God who is in control, the God who is all-powerful, is there. He's available. It's a door of fellowship. Well, today we open a third door, another door, and each door, again, is an invitation to a new exhibit. So I hope you're ready. We're going to be in chapters 4 and 5, and of course we'll have it up here on the screen for you. But the door today is a new vision given to John, and we'll be in Revelation again, chapter 4, and this is what we get in on. After this I looked, John says, and there in heaven was an open door. There it is. The first voice that I heard speaking to me was like a trumpet. So it's a loud voice, and here's what the trumpet-like voice said. Come up here. John's down there. He's, again, on the Lord's Day, remember, and he's worshiping, and then he gets this vision, and the vision was loud, and it says, come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this. So this is an opportunity, get this, to get in on heaven. I'm going to bring you from where you are up here for just a minute. I want to show you some perspective. I want to give you an exhibit. I want to manifest something that you can see that's very real for you. In fact, it was so real that John immediately enters into what we call a prophetic trance. Verse 2 says, immediately I was in the Spirit. That's what it means. John enters into this trance-like states, and a throne was set there in heaven. This is what John sees. The first thing he sees as he enters into this prophetic state is a throne. And there was one seated on the throne. Now, we aren't super familiar with thrones in America. That's actually part of who we are, is we created an entire government system to keep thrones out. I don't know if you knew that, but that's why we're not super familiar with the language of thrones or dominions, right? But if you were to travel the world, you would encounter thrones. They're still out there. They still exist. And if you went to, for instance, England, you would enter into a throne room. And here's what thrones and throne rooms are all about. They're all advertisements. That's what they do. If you enter in a throne room, you're getting an advertisement, a little bit of propaganda thrown your direction. And what each throne does is tells about the glory of the one who sits on the throne. And this is no exception. Actually, if you were to read some of the description of this throne, we don't have time to do all that this morning, but if you were to read it, you'd read about this emerald rainbow and these incredible stones, rare and precious stones that sort of make up this throne. All of those things are images that generate the idea that this is a great and a mighty throne. Throne rooms were places where declarations are made. And so you would often see under thrones, maybe at the footstool, an image carved into it with the nations that were overcome by the king who sat on the throne. Or you would see images like a lion or a bear or something great, some animal that was mighty. And as a result, the king was kind of essentially saying with that carving that, hey, I'm mighty. I'm a king with real authority. And so you walk into these rooms and you see all these metaphors. Well, John is essentially taking us to that kind of a situation. Everything in this throne room emphasizes the character or the nature of the one sitting on the throne. Just a couple things to whet your palate is there are some creatures. It isn't just a throne, but there's other people in there. This is God the Father on the throne, and then there's angels. These angels you can read about. They're incredible angels, and here's some of the explanation for them. They have eyes all over the place, which is super weird, right? Just covered in eyes. Well, what does that mean? Well, it's a metaphor, right? It's meant to describe something about the one who created them, God the Father. So everything in this room points back to God the Father. These eyes speak to, for instance, the fact that God can see everything. which is important because the believers that were first hearing this message, this vision from John, needed to know that God was intimately acquainted with every aspect of their lives, even in suffering. This is the God who can see it all. These angels also have wings all over the place, which means they're always ready to do the bidding of the Father. There's this readiness about the throne. This throne room has a sea of glass. In fact, just saying it kind of makes you calm, doesn't it? It isn't this tumultuous sort of wave-like experience. It isn't this upheaval in the throne room, but there's the smooth sea of glass. It's as if every decision, every edict, every decree comes from a place of absolute cool confidence. All of this, right, is supposed to magnify the greatness of the King. So this is essentially what John sees. And if you want to know what everybody is thinking about this throne as this image, John is now taken to be able to see what those who are in the room and who are a part of this experience are declaring with their mouth. And here is what they say about the one seated on the throne. Holy, 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 Lord God the Almighty. That's not a word we use very often, but it means that God is all-powerful. Who was, who is, and who is to come. He's eternal. So we have this absolute purity, holy, 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 absolute power. By the way, you don't want somebody that is all-powerful without being all pure. And who is eternal. It doesn't matter what it is that we're facing, there is an eternal, all-powerful, and absolutely holy God available. That's what all of the creatures and all of the individuals that are part of this throne room scene are saying. This is what they're doing. And at the same moment, there's a group of elders. These elders represent probably church saints from our era. And they have crowns because they have done deeds that are worthy of crowns. And they take their crowns and they throw these crowns at the feet of the one sitting on the throne, God the Father, because He is worthy ultimately of all glory. And listen to what they say. This is their declaration about God the Father. Our Lord and God, you are worthy to receive glory and honor and power because you have created all things. And because of your will, they exist and were created. It's interesting what is happening here is that John has encountered this magnificent throne room, this holy, holy, holy God. All-powerful, totally pure, completely unlike the kings of the earth that the individuals John's writing to were very much acquainted with, who wanted them dead, who had used their leverage and their riches and their resources to persecute the church. This God is otherworldly. He is unlike the kings of the earth. He rules and reigns with purity. He does only what is right by people, never what is wrong. He never leverages his throne for his own ends or his own wicked ends. He's a king in absolute holiness, absolute glory, absolute power. Out of his throne room comes gifts for the people to liberate them rather than enslave them. But there's something else going on here too, and maybe you caught it at the end of verse 11 there. In a sense, John is given a description about the extent of God's kingdom. What everybody was experiencing in the suffering that was being encountered there while John is having this vision was they were experiencing the power of the thrones on earth. But here we get this picture of the power of the throne in heaven, and notice the extent of that power. It's over all created things. In other words, if John was looking for borders to this kingdom, this eternal kingdom, there were no borders. Or maybe you could say it was borderless, or if there were borders, it was over all creation, all created things. Like there's nothing that has been created that doesn't serve the Creator in some way. That God is over all of it, which is important. John essentially wants the reader, I think, to know this. heaven's rule extends to all creation. He is Almighty God. He's eternal. He rules in purity and righteousness. He is a great king, but his kingdom is without borders. It extends to all creation, even wicked creation. That ultimately, when God decides to intervene, and this is why it mattered to them, when God decides to intervene and disrupt the plans of the evil one, he can. He just speaks a word and things change. That's what he does. He is almighty. He is all-powerful. Now, this would have been a powerful, powerful image for believers encountering suffering. But there's another surface reality that this brings up, and that is that there was not one kingdom, God's domain, but there was a cosmic battle that was spilling over into the experience these believers had in their daily life. It was a battle between good and evil. You see, there was a king, a mighty king, sitting on a throne. He was almighty, all-powerful, and he saw all of it. And he was receiving worship in heaven, but he was not receiving worship everywhere on earth. And the believers were worshiping, but the reality is that there was another kingdom at play. It was the kingdom of Satan, a kingdom of darkness. And it was in contrast to this great kingdom of light that God the Father had rule and jurisdiction over. It was a counterfeit kingdom, and it was forged it was forged in hell. It was a kingdom that sought not the good of mankind, but to steal, to kill, and to destroy. It used deception as its ultimate power, its weapon. And it essentially had taken thrones and dominions on earth, had captivated them, and had used men to deceive other men and to kill and harm other men. At this point in time, it was taking over. If you were a Christian in the first century, you didn't see a global church. What you saw was Rome, and it was global, and it worshiped other gods. It worshiped the God that had dominion over hell. Satan wants to pervert everything. He wants to take control. As a matter of fact, I think we underestimate his power. We underestimate his authority. The reality is the picture that we get from the Bible about evil is that if evil isn't stopped, it will take over. And that the fact of the matter is that when we think about the concept of evil, evil has a way of taking root in our lives. It has a way of taking root in our government. It has a way of taking root in society as a whole. And if something doesn't stop it, it will absolutely take over. That it doesn't just stop when it reaches the goal. It just keeps going. It just keeps rolling. And eventually, its desire is to take dominion over everything. Many people have noticed this about the nature of evil. One of our presidents, I believe it was Abraham Lincoln, once said, if good men do nothing, right, evil wins. Something like that. The reality is that evil will win unless God intervenes. Evil has to be fought. You can't just let it lie. God will intervene, though. In fact, one of the images in this great heavenly exhibit is that of a God who deeply cares about humanity and what happens to all creation. And he can't just sit by and watch the history of evil unfold without doing something about it. So the very next image that John takes us to is to the image of a scroll. We get in on what's called the wrath of a king. We all have these images, maybe of some of those movies we like, Braveheart, kings that rise up, and they do something about the injustice in the world, and we all sort of rally to the cause because there is a right. There is a right way to live. There is something that frees the people. There is something that is good, worth fighting for. It's the wrath of a king. But when we talk about wrath, it's interesting to me because wrath often is overdone. I don't know if you're one of those individuals that really appreciates wrath. You might not think you do, but I remember a time in our nation's history when we decided to go take out Saddam Hussein. Do you remember those days? And one of the things that Americans said during that period of time was, we just need to go over there and nuke them. All of them? Yes. Kill them all. That's wrath. That's wrath, right? And if you're not sold on the fact that you have wrath in your heart, I got news for you. It's in a lot of you women. It's in a lot of you mothers. My son plays football. I was at a football game a couple weeks ago, and there was a bad call on the field. That mother bear thing is real. I mean, it is tit for tat, right? I mean, it is eye for eye, tooth for tooth, the law of the jungle. I mean, all the claws can come out. That's wrath, right? That's wrath. There's many of us actually have a persuasion in that direction, and then there's kind of the opposite. There's kind of that idea that wrath is never a good thing, and God is so loving, and He's so nice, and He's so gentle, and He's so kind that He would never treat anybody with judgment of any kind. In fact, you probably grew up in a home that said something like this: if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. How'd that work? You said it in your heart. I know you did. That's wrath. In fact, the reality is on September 11th, on a serious note, September 11th, if you were there, if you remember that moment, something came out of you, didn't it? Something said, this is wrong. Something said, justice must be done. Do you know what that voice was in you? That was the image of God in you. See, when it comes to wrath, all of us have it in us because it is an essential part of the nature of God. The question is it a good thing? Or, maybe better put, how does wrath look? And what I'm here to tell you is that sort of that mother bear instinct or that, don't say anything if it isn't nice, both of those are mistakes. Both of those are inaccurate when it comes to describing the wrath of a king or the wrath of God in this case. That there is another description to wrath, and I want to walk you into it with this kind of setup. I want to talk a little bit about grace and mercy because those are way more familiar and they're way more fun to talk about, right? So what do we know about grace? Well, grace means what? It means getting something you don't deserve. Excellent. Okay, now what about mercy? Mercy means not getting something you do deserve. Like you broke the law and you deserve punishment and then you didn't get it. Mercy. So you have grace, getting something that you don't deserve, God's favor, right? Oftentimes we describe it, or just energy to do the right thing. I mean, there's a lot of kinds of graces mentioned in Scripture. And then there's mercy, actually being delivered from something because God intervened and showed up and didn't give you what you did deserve. Here's what wrath is. Wrath is this: it's retribution, or otherwise put, getting exactly what you deserve. And say, well, hold on, doesn't that seem to overcome or conflict with grace and mercy? The answer is no, because look at it closely. It's not getting more than you deserve. It's not nuke 'em all. It's not the mother bear. It's getting exactly what you deserve. Those refs, they did not deserve those words from those moms, I'm telling you. They were just doing their best, you know it. See, the wrath of man takes us way beyond. In fact, some of you have disciplined your kids and you went way beyond. It is punishment. There is punishment. I know it's not a word we use very often, but that's the reality, right? There is punishment. We send somebody to prison, that's punishment for a crime. I mean, we don't have to sidestep that, do we? Because that's justice. We have a world that's crying for justice. There is justice. The problem is the justice of man almost never looks like the justice of God. The fact of the matter is when it comes to the wrath of God, it isn't more than you deserve, and neither is it less than you deserve. It is exactly what you deserve. And in this case, it is distributed to hell with all of its fury. To those who have had every opportunity to believe in God but have actually decided not to. It is against those who have received grace and mercy their entire lives and instead have done injustice. It's for hell and for all those who have chosen to go there. And it is exact punishment. And it's what we encounter next in chapter 5. Listen to this. I saw in the right hand of the one seated on the throne a scroll. What is this scroll? It's actually the word Biblia. We get the word Bible from it, and it's the scroll of war. It's the war scroll. This is the document that has all the plans for carrying out the war of God against the kingdom of Satan. You had an opportunity last week when Pastor Walker was up here to actually walk through chapter 6 through 20 and discuss what all of that looked like. But here we have the unveiling. This is the plan. This is the document that sets the plan, that sets the war in motion. But there's a problem with the scroll, and John tells us why. In verse 2, he says, I saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, who is worthy to open the scroll and to break its seals? This is the moment for wrath. This is the moment for God to pour out this wrath on all mankind, absolute justice on all mankind, all those who have allied themselves with Satan and his kingdom. This is the moment, but this question goes out, and it's a troubling question. Not who is holy, but who is what? Worthy. And it's interesting because this angel comes out into the throne room. Everybody's holy. Everybody's pure. This is a place of purity. But that's not the question. The question is, who is worthy? Who is worthy? In other words, who has earned the right to be the judge? Who has earned the right to unleash the wrath? You have to be worthy of it. Does that strike you as amazing? This isn't just this picture of this unethical, uncontrolled, unbridled God that's just angry and vengeful and just wants to smite people. Even in this throne room, there's this absolute crystal clear control, this calm from which edicts and decrees goes out that demands that everything that is done rightly. Not too much and not too little. This is a place of righteousness. Fact of the matter is, as a result of asking this question, no one was found in heaven. Verse 3, no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or even to look into it. In other words, we have all the war plans, justice is about to be done, but nobody can execute it. It's really hard to underestimate the dramatic moment that this vision would have created. Actually, if you were to read John's encounter with this, it ends him in a bunch of tears. He weeps and weeps uncontrollably because nobody could open up the scroll. Listen, justice could not be done. It's God, he's on his throne. And it's at this moment that the narrative is saved. There's a shift that takes place in verse 5. Listen to this. An elder comes to John and says this. John puts his hand on his shoulder. Stop crying. I want you to look at something. And just then something enters the room. Look, the Lion from the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has been victorious. He has overcome. He has prevailed is the word. He's been victorious so that he may open the scroll and its 7 seals. Then I saw one like a lamb slaughtered. This is an incredible analogy, a picture of who this person, this God-man, we know him to be Jesus or the Christ, is. He is both the lion and the lamb. The lion speaks to his authority, his kingly authority. He has the right to rule. And he is a king with the ability to make war. But he's also, on the same token, he's also a lamb that has been slaughtered. He's both a lion and he is a lamb. Well, what does it mean here to be a lamb? Well, we're going to fast forward to verse 9 because this imagery that John sees actually prompts a declaration from the throne room, from the angels. And this is what they sing a new song, and the song goes like this, verse 9, you are worthy to take the scroll. You, Jesus, we know him as Jesus, right? You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals because, here's why, you were slaughtered, and you redeemed people for God by your blood from every tribe and language and people and nation, and continues. In other words, the reason that the lion and the lamb was worthy to open the scroll and to break its seal and to unleash wrath, to unleash heaven's fury against godlessness, and to rid earth of the evil that was ruling, of the evil that was leveraged against these Christians, the reason that this lion lamb was worthy is because his robe had been dipped in blood. I find it ironic. We often picture God the Father, again, as this God who just wants to go after people. But did you know this? The same John who receives this vision and revelation writes about the words of Jesus in the Gospel of John and says this, that not even the Father judges the world, but he has given all judgment to the Son. Why? Why is it that Jesus is the only one found worthy to judge the earth, to deliver the edict written in the scroll? It's because you were slaughtered and you redeemed. It's because you lived a sinless life on earth, and because you went through death victoriously on the other side and were raised from the grave. In other words, it's because you took all the sin of all mankind and you let it crush you. In other words, the one who judges has deeply understood the price that is required. Are you following me? The one who is given authority to judge is not without understanding, not without mercy, not without grace. He became sin for us through his blood. In other words, if there's anybody that you would want to judge you, it would be somebody who understands all the evil things you did like nobody understands. This is why Jesus is given authority to unlock the scroll with all of its wrath. Because even in judgment, God will be found merciful. Justice and mercy met on the cross, and even in judgment, both will be on display. In fact, matter of fact, here's the reality. Paul writes about this experience of the future. He says, someday, every knee will bow of those who are in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and everyone will confess that Jesus is Lord to the glory of God the Father. How is it that every knee will bow? Because they will all have to acknowledge someday that when Jesus judged them, when he even sent them to hell, that he had done the right thing. Isn't that incredible? He'd done the right thing. He could completely sympathize with all of our weaknesses, all of our sin. He has a robe dipped in blood, and at the same time, bring justice. Nobody will go to hell that shouldn't be there. Nobody will go to hell without opportunity first to be redeemed because of the blood of the Lamb. It's at this point in history that essentially what John wants us to understand is that all the wrongs must be righted. In other words, he will judge rightly. That's important that we understand that. That when judgment happens in chapter 6 through 20, it is a righteous cause. It's not too much and it isn't too little. Well, this causes an incredible commotion in heaven that's fantastic. Myriads and myriads of angels, too many to count is the idea, begin to rejoice. And they make a declaration. And here's what they say with their loud voice. They say, the Lamb who was slaughtered is worthy. They exult in this. They revel in this. This brings great rejoicing to heaven. He is worthy to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and blessing. And the praise continues in verse 13. I heard every creature in heaven, on earth, and under the earth, on the sea, and everything in them say, blessing and honor and glory and dominion to the one seated on the throne and to Jesus and to the Lamb forever and ever. Do you realize that even hell is a place where the Lamb will receive praise for eternity? This is because he is a righteous judge, and what he will do is bring absolute justice. That's what his wrath demands. Now here's what we know. This is meant to be a snapshot. This is meant to be a picture that was meant to encourage believers enduring some incredible suffering. And here's some things I just want to call out that I think are fantastic. The first thing is this. If you read this, you immediately get the sense that worship in heaven never stops and is incredibly loud. It's loud. I got news for you. Worship in heaven is loud. Why? Why is it so loud? Because there is no stutter in heaven. There is no hesitancy in heaven. There is no uncertainty that final victory has been won. There is a sea of glass in front of the throne. He is Almighty God. He sees everything. He has got all the power. And his reign, his jurisdiction, well, it's over all of his creatures, all creation. When he speaks the word, heaven moves, and it moves in our direction. There is no uncertainty about final victory. That's important that we understand that there's real power at just the moment we need it. If God has final victory, then certainly he has power to deal with the things that I'm struggling with in my life today. But there's something else here that I think is noteworthy. When John writes this, you get the sense that he expects them to believe it. He expects you to believe it. And it's interesting because of the kind of description. Like, we don't talk this way, right? There's a throne room in heaven and emerald rainbows and jasper and all this kind of stuff. And it could feel like, well, maybe this is just a kind of a way of encouraging people, but it's not very real. And yet John doesn't write it that way. He writes something that he thinks is real. What is it? What was it that causes him to write that way? As if you could believe this. As if this in heaven was as real as the thrones and the dominions on earth that they were under the thumb of. Well, I think for John, you might say, well, he actually encountered Jesus. Not just the Jesus in the Gospels who produces miracles, but even the Jesus, right, who raises from the dead. And you could imagine that for John, it would probably be not that big of a deal to embrace this vision. He has a relationship with Jesus. He's experienced personally the power of Jesus. But what about them and what about us? Well, I think there's a clue buried in this passage that caused them to believe the message and the vision that John records. And it's this idea that something brand new had taken place that could not be explained, that kings and thrones and dominions had tried to achieve but had always failed at. And even though there had been declarations and attempts made, and there are currently declarations and attempts made, nobody has ever been able to achieve what these believers had personally saw and had experienced in their midst. And it was this, that when the church was born, all the barriers, all the borders, all the boundaries that separate us immediately fell. And in their wake, people from every tribe and every tongue and every nation came together under one new banner called the church. And what nobody could explain and what nobody had been able to achieve, they had been able to achieve. And listen, you didn't have to lose your color to become part of the church. And you didn't have to lose your culture to become part of the church. You didn't have to change your status or change your job to become part of the church. You didn't have to leave your identity behind. You became part of the church by faith, and you entered into a brand new family, and reconciliation took place. And for the first time, people from every culture were in the same room, and from every status were in the same room, and they were all worshiping one King. And this is the image. In fact, we can read it again here in verse 9. It says, "You are worthy. You redeem people for God by your blood from" what? Say it with me. "Every tribe, every language and people and nation." Guys, don't ever let that just kind of go over your head. That is totally unique. In fact, we experience that very thing today. And when John records this and he distributes it to the church, here's what they knew. They had experienced that already. And because they had experienced that, this vision was meant to be believable. And it was, in fact, believable. They understood that the future could be grabbed onto and pulled into their present. They understand that there was a king sitting on a throne, and that king could be grabbed onto and pulled right into their present. That their world may be filled with chaos and waves and storms, but the reality is there was a sea of glass, and that sea of glass had implications for their present experience. And it didn't matter where they came from. They knew who they belonged to and where they were going. And that changed everything. Here's what I think this means as the band comes up to lead us in our worship here. I want to reflect just briefly on what I think this calls us to. Like, if this is true, what does it mean for you, for me, today? What is it that we need that we were meant to hear this morning? I want to kind of distill it into one word, my best attempt. Here's what I think John would want us to understand. The Spirit, as he gives this vision to John, would want each one of us to understand that in the very moment where the conflict is at its worst, we have every reason to be bold. That we were actually created to be bold. That, listen, we cannot and we must not ever be silent. In fact, listen to this. If we were to take a snapshot of chapter 1 through chapter 5, there's these two words used. They're bookends, and they kind of seal the deal before we get into the wrath of God in 6 through 20, and it's the word blessed. And here's what's so interesting about these two terms. They're different, even though we translate them the same way in the English, but in chapter 1, verse 3, it says, "Oh, how happy is the one who reads the words of this book." You guys remember that from week one, that there's a blessing associated with reading this book. And the idea here is that the one who reads this can have joy or can have happiness born out of a rich peace that they experience. There's happiness in the midst of suffering. It's possible. John opens that door. And then at the very end of this, in chapter 5, there's the word blessed used here, but it's the word for eulogy or eulogize. It means to praise. Blessed is the one, right, who's worthy of all power and glory and honor. He is worthy of all blessing. In other words, John is saying this: it is always the right time. It is always the right time to be happy, and it is always the right time to sing praise. It is always the right time to be bold with your mouth. It is always the right time to speak about the glory of a great king who enters into our plight, our lives. He reaches down into the things that we're messing with, the junk that we don't think we can control, and we can claim in that moment fellowship and opportunity with the Almighty God. I know that's you and it's me, and who are we? But it's a privilege that we have. It doesn't matter who you are, where you came from, what tribe or language you speak, or how you dressed this morning. The promise is for you. I just pray that you don't neglect it, that I don't neglect it. It's always a good time to be happy and to praise. So what I want to do this morning is I want to invite you to do just that. I don't know what God is speaking to your heart, but I know He's speaking. He's speaking from a throne, and it's for you. Would you stand? Would you stand? Would you worship? And as you sing these words, would you open your hearts to the King of glory?
Thank you for listening. For more of our podcasts and to discover how you can connect, visit us at churchak.org or download our Church on the Rock AK app from either iTunes or Google Play.